Welcome to the Energizing America podcast, where we talk all things energy and why we need it in our business, communities, and life. A fun morning to sit down with Paul here, who worked at a local coal industry in the area, and I'm just excited to sit down and talk about coal and the declining industry and all kinds of things energy. So welcome, Paul. Good to have you.
Thank you.
I walked into your facility, and if I recall correctly, you had worked there 43 years.
That is correct, yeah.
43 years in a declining industry. And I left there thinking, okay, that's one thing to work 43 years somewhere. It's a whole other thing to work 43 years in an industry as tough as coal. And even more so, you didn't look a day over 43. I couldn't put the three together. It didn't make sense.
What I've noticed in the workforce, this is my first opinion, is when a breakdown occurs years ago, everybody would drop everything, come to work. We'll get it fixed, and we're going to get it running. We have to get things running again. Otherwise, they're not making money here. Today, it seems like some of the people think, well, I work 8 to 4:30, and then I go home. That's not how it is. That's where you want it to be.
Yeah.
But you can't guarantee that's going to happen every day.
Well, life isn't ideal, right? We wish it was ideal. But the fact is that there's a lot of times it's just not ideal. Plant might be down and we got to stay late. I heard one time a guy said, we got to quit talking about work-life balance. There is no such thing. Life includes work, and it includes family, and it includes all these other things. And we have to balance out life. Like, work is part of life. Mm-hmm. And that may mean that sometimes I'm flying on an airplane on the way home from a safety meeting out in North Dakota or out in New Mexico, and it might be 9 o'clock on a Friday night. Every Friday night, my wife and I go on a date night. So we might be doing our date night on Saturday morning instead. That's the way it is, right?
Oh, yeah.
And you can't call that like, oh, you don't know how to do work-life. I actually know how to include life in my work, or work in my life, plus include family.
Just had this conversation with my two girls. I said, how many times in my career have we celebrated Christmas on a day other than Christmas, or Thanksgiving on a day other than Thanksgiving? We're always moving that day around, just based around what my commands were at work. And I have to work on Thanksgiving. We're going to have it on Monday, so this week. And it happened all the time.
And what difference does it really make?
It's the family get together. That's what it was all
you
about.
Come in as an electrician, you retire as a supervisor. You obviously were led at times, and even as a supervisor, you had a boss too. But when you think about the word leadership, I'm kind of fascinated by this concept. What does leadership look like to you?
Somebody that I look up to. Nothing against my bosses that I had over the year. They're all great. But the one gentleman that sticks in my mind is a gentleman that was in the same role as I was. And he was an inventor prior to him coming to our facility. And when I seen what he could do, I was like, what are you doing here? And he said prior to this job, what he would do with any industry would come to the company he worked for because there was no resolve for it. And he would invent something to fix that and resolve it. And when he sat down if there was an issue, he never got tired. His previous job, I talked to coworkers that he worked with. They said there'd be times that he'd be working on a job all week trying to figure out a resolve. On Friday when they closed up, he'd still be in the lab trying to figure something out. He said when I came back working Monday, he was still there. He hadn't got home yet. He'd sleep at the bench. I mean, he has so much drive. He said, I just hate losing. That guy taught me so much. Unfortunately, he's not with us anymore, but he was my biggest role model. He sticks well in my mind as far as give me an example of what leadership looks like. This is what you should be doing.
Dive in and stay committed to it.
Be committed and lead by example. I mean, as a supervisor, I wouldn't expect somebody to not have Thanksgiving with their family if I wasn't willing to do it as well. I guess that's a military thing, you know. And sergeant says, follow me, be around your back, you know. So.
Exactly. It's really hard. I can't hardly leave the office if people are still there.
Yep.
And we got one gal, she loves to stay a little late. Like, that's just the way she is, you know, and can drive me nuts sometimes because like I feel guilty. I have to go say goodnight to her. Yeah. And I'm telling her like, this doesn't feel right leaving when there's still somebody here. Everyone has different work schedules and so on.
I felt that way too. We had a rotating schedule 7 days a week, and my work schedule was typically a 7 to 3 shift. I always felt I had to be there to talk with the night shift guy coming off his shift. I couldn't just say, have a nice day. I had to spend some time with him, and I also wanted to spend time with our afternoon crew. So a typical work day was always 9 to 10 hours for me. I just needed that. And I was like you, I wouldn't feel comfortable otherwise. I just like, my day isn't complete. Something's missing here.
Yeah. So. As you worked with all these folks and even supervised some of them, did it feel good to be a leader?
It did, especially when you see people come through the workforce and they succeed. You can see at the end of the day if somebody can tell, I had a good day today, and I learned a lot today. Sometimes you're involved in that, and not a lot of times you do it on their own, but there's times when you've contributed to that. It's a good feeling. Safety was always a big push for me, and if you start working at a substation and some people say, I know what you're doing, I said, let's work together on this. We both know what we're doing, but we don't want no mistakes. So, and then when at the end of the time we got all done and things are working good, it's like, nice, that was awesome. So,
and especially when nobody got hurt, right? Because a lot of times these younger guys that come into the workforce or gals, when you're in your early 20s, you're so full of production. You just got it. You don't have life experience to say, hey, this is what happens if you go too quickly. Here's what happens if you don't think about the next step. And so it's important that we also tell those people, hey, slow down. Let's think about the safety aspect here.
That's a good point. And talking about safety, when I first started, people were safe, but not like it is today. There is pre-job briefs you do ahead of time. There's protocol you follow, lockout, tagout, all those things. Before we just charged forward, everybody just looked out for each other. But now it's a secondhand look at everything before you go into it, even though you've done it 100 times. It's like, let's take another look at this before something may have changed.
Well, I even remember lockout, tagout when it first came out was, hey, lock it out, take it out. That was successful for a while. But then as the workforce got younger and less experienced, it was like, hey, we got to add a step. Lockout, takeout, and then verify.
Yep.
Verify wasn't part of the lockout, takeout mantra when it first came out. It was just, hey, lock it out, take it out. Oh, yeah, it's locked out. I'm good to go. Well, we had a situation at one of the industrial facilities that we were working at. Company told us, hey, this particular wire is the one that needs to be cut and blah, blah, blah. And we locked it out, went to go cut the wire, and we cut the wire, but it was the wrong wire. And it just by chance that wire had been locked out by someone else that had not taken that lockout.
Feeling.
It was wretched feeling.
Oh.
Like we could have lost somebody, right? And for the industrial plant manager, it was disheartening. Like he couldn't hardly sleep. He was so distraught by this. It really did is bring up the importance of verify. Like you cannot do enough verification.
I always told my guys, I says, we may have done this 100 times, but let's make sure we are covering our bases. I don't want to call your wife and say there's been an accident. I don't want to be that guy.
Well, and Paul, as the facilities have become more automated and more systematic, there's been less people involved, right? So that experience is harder to translate from generation to generation. And then plus, you don't know what a program might have done to what you just locked out. There might be another spot along the line that a programmer did something to. So that verification piece in today's world is totally different than it was in the early 80s.
The way they used to do it and the way they have to do it now. The new guys buy into it a lot easier than we do. The older guys, this is a 5-minute job. But now I got to do a pre-job brief. I have to do this lockout, takeout. I got to do all that. Now it's going to take 2 hours to get this done. I says, yeah, but we're going to go home safe. I mean, it's frustrating for them. The newer guys like, oh, this is how it's done. They don't know any difference. So
the older experienced generation, their work is physical. And if they're not physically working, they're being unproductive, right?
You hit it spot on.
We try and tell our crews, hey, you know what? Let the older one be driving to the job and you be filling out the JSA, talking about the potential things that you're going to be encountering. So when you get there, you can spend less time with the older fella, but you do the JSA and talk about it as a group, right? But don't make him do that piece because that's not his thing. Lean on his experience to do it. He can still be very involved in it, right? Pass along the JSA, everyone signs off on it, and then head off to work. But if you try and make the production guy be that person, that's a hard sell. But you can still capitalize on them.
Absolutely. And, older people, you can't bark at their experience level. Project manager I mentioned earlier, he was involved with research on developing what they call a pothead. It's on the top of a telephone pole, power pole. He says that was actually part of the team that developed these things. And we happened to have one in our facility when he was working for us. And it's basically like a big Y. And it's full of gunk inside of it to keep it for terminations to be protected. He said, yeah, actually, like that one up there, I helped put that in back when this place was built. And he says, that one doesn't look that good. He said, when's the last time this been looked at? I said, I don't know if that's the power company. He said, I don't know. That night it blew up. It disintegrated. I'm like, you talk about experience. The guy looked at it and just could tell there's something's wrong up there. I looked at it looked fine to me. But I don't work on that stuff.
It's so easy to discount the older generation.
Yeah.
When you're full and you're 25 and you just want to bang something out. I remember actually being so frustrated. Like, why is he even here? He's just a production
This is an old guy.
Yeah. But like that story, how do you transfer that wealth of knowledge? You can't.
I didn't know any different. I'm like, well, it's working.
That's awesome.
That was amazing. I still can't believe it.
So, with leadership, I've thought so often about the challenges that come with it, right? Because you're dealing with sometimes where do people want to be in your company? How do you navigate? This one wants a day off. This one's got an important event. All of that stuff that goes into leadership. And it's a good thing we have some of that success to help motivate us to go forward, right? Like when you can see somebody succeed, like you were talking earlier, we had a guy that went out in North Dakota, made a bunch of money, but he was different than everyone everyone else who went out in North Dakota and made a bunch of money because he moved back here, he had a bunch of money to go buy a house and start a family. Ever since, he's just been rocking it. That motivates me to deal with that next challenge, to feel like you just are playing a small role in that. You know, it's not because of you, but you're just playing a small role in that wheel. When you think back about that whole leadership journey, what got you into leadership? Like why'd you go from the electrician to the supervisor?
My life was originally going to be going to the engineering world. My father became ill and I had to cut my engineering career short. I wasn't able to finish college. My objective when I was going to college to be an engineer was to be in a management role of some sort. It was instilled in me, in my blood, to do that. I took advantage of this. It was a career choice with 26 years contract there. And I'm like, I can take care of my parents and I got a family started out so I can get going here. The drive for me to keep going into management was long-lived because we were a young company. There was young people there, and I knew it would be a long time before I could get there. So I just had to try to set my goals, to try to let the company know this is what I want to do, and hopefully they'll look at me in a positive way when the time comes.
By the time you are retiring there, has it been bought and sold several times, or have you always worked for the same parent?
The first 10 years, it was a company called Reese Coal Company that managed the facility. Our parent company, at the 10-year interval, would have the option of taking over the management role or just let Reese Coal Company continue. Well, they chose to take over management of it. Thus, the contract got extended. The 26 years went beyond that, obviously, because I was there 43. But
were you a team of 10 people, and then by the time you retired, it was a company of 13,000 people? Or was it always kind of the same overall size?
I don't really know how big Reese was at that time, but, our parent company's got about 11 to 12,000. We're a subsidiary of them. We only had it, I think at our peak, we were around 70 employees at our facility. And through attrition and the diminishing of business, our president feels that we don't have to lay anybody off. We're going to be able to just not disrupt anybody's life or their family life, maintain a solid workforce, providing they stay there, and without having to lay people off, and just through attrition, maintain a solid work team there.
So you kind of always worked with about 70 folks
at the peak.
The time. Mm-hmm. Okay.
Yep. And when I started there, I was the 32nd employee hired.
30
So they give you an idea of that. So then now 20 years later, we're at 70. It doubled in size, and that was enough.
That's what I was going to ask. Frankly, when I got involved in Wescom back in 2013, there was 5 of us, right? And now there's nearly a couple hundred of us. And that's come with some real mental games for me. Like, I think I still know everyone's name. I think I could still pick them out when I go out to our offices and out to our fields, but it's not as easy as it once was. There's a little difference in that, in working in a company that's super small versus a company that's a bit larger.
The gentleman I talked to before about being a project manager, when he did the project of their nuclear power plant that we built, he said there was 6,000 employees building this plant. And he says in charge of all of them. And he said, walk by, he said, boy, that guy'd say good morning to me. And I'm like, say good morning. He says, who is that? He says, he works for you. He says, he does. Well, what's he do? There's just too many people. You can't keep track of it all.
Well, and it is. It's hard to keep track of. But then even for the employee, for the person out turning the wrench, pulling the wire, getting in the truck and trying to get the oil change done, the larger the company is, the harder it is to just feel like you're part of it. So you really got to stay real. You got to stay out in the field and go do that project from time to time. You got to go get your own boots dirty so that you can remember what that feels like. So when you're out working with those guys, or even when you go see them, you can feel a bit of their pain. I have a comment at Wescom that production trumps policy. And it's not saying that, that we don't follow policy. Like, of course, we have to do JSA before you start the work. That's the requirement. But what I mean by production trumps policy is that as we've grown, sometimes we like to get policy ridden, and managers will come in the office and, okay, we need a policy for X. And like, yeah, that sounds cute. But you go put on your boots, you head over to the local coal dock, what you think is going to be an 8-hour day, only to have a ship not arrive on time, or a ship leave late, or the ship loader not move, or whatever happened, and now you're working until midnight. Yep. Well, the policy says you can only work 8 hours a day or 10 hours. After that, you require manager approval, but the manager is sitting on his boat in the evening with his family. Now, what does the employee do, right?
Sure.
So let's be real, and let's remind ourselves that production always trumps policy. Think about the spirit of the policy as you're getting the production done, and just trust the people to do it. But boy, that's been a weird transition going from a smaller company to a bit larger. It's great to get the perspective of what that feels like.
Sure.
So think back to when you started, Paul, and now as you're ending your career. Part of your career now going forward, Paul, is just to remind the rest of us what it means to get up and get to work. And you got some beautiful daughters you got to finish up with, and You got a long road ahead of you. Is there anything that comes to mind that you wish somebody would have told you when you were starting your career?
Prior to my career starting, let me know the condition of my parents' health. So I could have pursued getting my engineering degree. And I had a goal, and that goal got disrupted when all that happened. My father was going to lose his home. I was the only one in a position to really kind of take on that responsibility to help pay the household bills, move back home. If somebody could have said, you should be looking out for your father because something don't look right with him. And he had a massive stroke is what happened. I wasn't at home. I had no idea. But if I could have changed anything, that would have been something. Maybe, who knows? Maybe my life would be the same way. I think that would have made a difference, I think.
Yeah. It's interesting because especially today's generation, there's so many self-help books. There's so many podcasts. We box everyone into what a perfect human being should look like. This is my observation. I'm not saying this is anything factual. I do have 9 children and I see them every day and I see this happening. The social pressure to be this amazing individual and the difficulty in coaching them through I want you to be you. There is no such thing as a perfect human being. I want you to be you. And that means you're going to have an imperfect life as you go forward. You're going to have goals. You're going to have aspirations. Some of them are going to work out. Some of them don't. But at the end of the day, what I want is a Paul, a gentleman who lives a gentleman's life, who raises a family, is a member of a community. And when he looks back, he can say, well, that was a race well run with its imperfections.
It's not a bowl of roses, but it's, you deal with it daily. And you do the best you can. I was sitting reflecting when you were talking about how to manage people. And there was a guy I worked with whose father he worked for Pickens Mathers iron ore mines and moved on to a bigger role in the company instead of just being a plant manager. He would go to company-owned facilities all over the world and when there was an issue, and he'd find out what the problem was. And his name was Charlie, this guy's name was. And he says, I would go to a plant, and I said, I want to go out in the yard. Take me for a ride. They'd go with the plant manager out there, and he's like, there's a guy running a dragline shovel or something. He says, tell that guy I want to talk to him. He said, but he's trying to load the trucks and stuff. He said, I don't care. Tell him to shut the shovel down. I want to talk to him. And of course, the guy operating the shovel is like, oh, I did something wrong. Because that's how it is. I mean, you got to keep production. You got to keep going. He's sitting in the truck and Charlie he introduced himself and he said, I'm new in the area. And you know any good fishing spots around the area? Or do you do any hunting around here? He said, we just have a guy-to-guy talk. And we just talk for half an hour, 45 minutes. And the plant manager is on rice paper, just like nervous as heck. But he says, and then you let him go. He says, I build their confidence by, hey, I'm human, you're human. We all got the same objective here, but it doesn't mean it's got to be like this every day.
No, and it seems like we define so much of our life by this word success. And oftentimes when we think about the word success, we go to money and or career positions, right? And you just talked about the situation with your father and the disruption and so on with it. But imagine if you hadn't been in that position to take care of Dad.
Yeah. That would have changed my life. I should try to make a difference. But I was in a position to do so. But if I was in a position to not be able to do that, I think that would be more detrimental to my life by doing so.
More so than the aspirations of becoming an engineer that got disrupted.
Correct.
Right. Yeah. So when you think about success, how do you define it?
It's in you. You've achieved what you've tried to set out your goal for. Everybody's got a goal every day, or the year. But at the end of the year, end of the day, you feel, this is a good day. This is, or if you have the bad day, how can I make it better? And tomorrow, let's change that. Or if you had a problem with somebody at work and you feel like you should be involved, you want to resolve that. You don't want it to be smooth. You don't want any disruptions, but there's going to be, like you mentioned. But if you can resolve those, put those to bed with confidence, to me, that's success.
That's a great way to sum it up. I think, on the Energizing America podcast, we talk a lot with the young, energetic entrepreneurs. We talk about big, bold ideas. We talk about the coal industry. We talk about oil and gas. We talk about Europe. We talk about France. We talk about all these global problems. Then a lot of times we talk about success, and everyone has all these cool ideas. And so rare do we sit down with somebody who's been through it all and can look back and reflect. And I think this podcast is phenomenal for me because I think I've forgotten a few things along the way. The drive can cause your eyes to look the wrong way. The ditches on each side of us are pretty deep. And if we forget that, hey, I'm really here. I really actually have a family. Ultimately, I want to run a good race. That's not defined by the dollar bill.
No.
It's actually not even defined by how many years you worked at a certain place.
No.
Or didn't. It's defined by that feeling that you have. That I don't know that I could have summed it up any better, Paul.
Well, it's easy to get tunnel vision. And you got to keep an open mind. There's more to life than going to work every day. And, you go with the idea of putting in a day's worth of work, but you don't know what the day's going to bring you. I mean, things happen. You were probably running the 2012 flood when we had that. Nobody expected that to happen.
That had to have been quite an atrocious thing over at your facility.
The whole plant was 4 feet underwater. That was the worst, I guess, month or 2 months. I felt confident we could get it back up and running. The devastation, it was like surreal.
I couldn't believe that. I worked at the district at the time, the local sewer district. And so we had millions of dollars in damage. So I got to know FEMA and go through all those processes. And I was totally blown away. And at the time, I remember my director telling us, something good will come from it. If nothing else, we're all going to learn good lessons.
Oh, yeah.
I would have never had to deal with a federal agency like FEMA before. I would have never known how all that stuff works.
I don't think anybody heard of FEMA till then.
Not in our
Except
area.
for the FEMA trailers.
Yeah.
Everybody heard about those.
Exactly. During what? Hurricane Katrina or whatever. Yeah. And so when you think back to the coal industry before we leave, what kind of people work in that industry down at the docks, and what kind of people are there?
At least the guys I worked with, they're family-oriented people. They love their family, their siblings, their kids. They come to work with the idea of putting in an honest day's work. We're a small company, and we become a family of our own. We all there to help each other. We got a great management team. At times, even though people may think otherwise, they do care about the employees. They do want them to succeed as well. They want things to go well for them. They don't want anybody to be hurt. The employees there are well fit for the group. It seems like the people that come there, that they know if they're not fitting in. They're just, this isn't for me. I'm not that type of guy. And they want to move on.
Yeah.
So, and it just kind of works itself out. You don't really force anybody out. There's guys that just like, this isn't for me. And whatever that is. I mean, you don't want to pry into their personal life, but when they move on, they move on.
But there's so much of this blue collar workforce, because you even touched on a desire to go to college, which I hope my kids go to college too. And that's not always an end all, right? No. You can have a good, solid career by lacing up your boots and going and doing exactly what you did.
Yep. And I was fortunate back when I was going to college, the technical programs, a lot of the industry was supporting that at the local technical schools because they realized there's going to be a huge retirement coming forth. They're going to need people. So they invested money into the colleges, said, let's get these people trained.
And here we are. We need them now more than ever. Yeah. I mean, we have so many job openings and care a lot about Wescom, but just more nationally and globally, especially in the energy industry. There is such a high need for highly technical folks in our industry. There's no way we're going to transition away from coal. Did I hear for peak production, coal is the quickest, most efficient way to get peak production demand met?
That is true. That is true. Yeah.
And so we're always going to have those peaks that until we figure out renewables, be able to get away from the peak demands.
Our parent company's been talking with this new push for EV vehicles. He says, we went through the same transition when air conditioning came into the Americas. The grid couldn't support the additional load right to the grid. We're going through that same transition now. Or how are people going to charge all these EV vehicles? Well, and you hear the conversations. Well, it's going to come from a coal-fired power plant. That's where it's going to come from. It will. And other places too. But the grid right now, if everybody's convert to EV vehicles, we don't have enough power to do that. So
it's scary how little power we have. How stretched that power grid is. I don't think the average American has any clue how close we are to a collapse on that. And you talk about people going with EV chargers. Look at what happened in California. The Californians were told, turn up your T-stats to 78. Do not charge your EV vehicles because we don't have enough power today.
Yeah.
A European, I think it was in Germany, they issued a press release to their citizens that as soon as your pasta starts boiling on your stove, turn the power off. They're now telling us how to cook. That's how stretched the grid is getting. Right? Yes. And so when we talk about EV charging and we talk about renewables, great. It sounds awesome. Let's keep marching forward. We need people to join the workforce so we can figure out storage, more efficiencies, all of that. And in the meantime, make sure that there's folks showing up and mining that coal, getting it on a rail car, getting it over here to the ports, putting it on a ship, get it out because it ain't going anywhere.
Yeah, that's one thing that scares me. I mean, coal industry, you can say what you want, but it provides good paying jobs and it's going to have to be supported in some fashion. And what level, who knows? Unfortunately, it's not up for me to say. It's not up for you to say. And I think the government's going to have their fingers involved.
But we can certainly support it. We don't always have to go down. We don't got to go down kicking and screaming, but we can go down logically. The society has made a change. We're moving away from it. Let's remind us that there's a bit of a transition we have to do. You can't just turn it off and turn it on. Paul, I don't want to take any more of your time, but before we go, just seriously, thanks for a hard working career because I think we need that as a younger generation to motivate us and especially working in an industry that, to me, the most phenomenal part, like I said, when we met, you worked 43 years. I think in my whole lifetime, I've only heard negative things about coal. I was expecting to meet you and see a coughing old man with, that could barely have lungs that would breathe. And and all this stuff that happens with coal. But here you are, you're looking at retirement. You're a healthy young man, and you're going to go have an awesome retirement.
Absolutely. That's the goal.
Well, thanks for everything
Thank you,
you do.
Shane.